Hey guys, Coach Chris here, back with another video. Wrapping up this just abysmal tournament. Bounced back a little bit in round 4, played a little bit better. So let's get through this last game. By this point I was fully on tilt, but resolved that, at least in this game, and I was already aware that my losses in rounds 2 and 3 were directly tied to me not following opening principles. I at least decided to play principled simple chess in this game, and it worked out. So d4, d5, about as classical as it gets, putting your pawns in the center. c4, offering a queen's gambit. I play the Slav with c6. The idea is to reinforce d5 and still keep options open to develop the light squared bishop, which is typically the problem child in the queen's gambit structures. So c6, knight f3, knight f6, and here my opponent plays an anti-Slav, which is not particularly challenging. I can just develop the light squared bishop outside the pawn structure. In this particular opening line, you kind of have to be ready for a gambit if white starts with knight c3 first before knight f3. And then in the absolute main line of the Slav, if you want to develop your bishop to f5, first you need to take. Otherwise, if you play it right away, then you often run into problems with this light squared bishop and the b7 pawn. So anyway, in this particular anti-Slav, bishop f5 is good to go. Knight c3, e6, and now got a great solid pawn structure. My dark squared bishop will operate very nicely on these dark squares. Bishop's outside the pawn chain, so it's very active. Opponent plays queen b6, attacking the b7 pawn, and don't really want to defend it with queen c8 or queen c7, because then bishop d2, rook on the c file, and after a trade and some knight jumps, that could be problematic with my queen on the same file as the rook. So really the only move here is queen b6, white takes, and I recapture. It is very important to understand that this trade favors black. These pawns are not weak. Black now controls the semi-open a file. This pawn recaptured toward the center. This trade is welcome. Bishop e2, and I have resolved to develop my pieces like an actual chess player in this game, and so that's what I do. Knight d7, castles, bishop d6, b3, castles. And what do you know? You're not busted when you play simple principled chess. So welcome relief. Bishop b2, and here the typical Slav breaks are e5 and c5. Before playing one of them, so for example, if I just played e5 right away, then white actually is just winning because white can first take on d5, and so let's just follow this line for a second. Knight b5, bishop back, and then this hurts. So before playing e5, I first wanted to disallow white the option to take on d5, and so I took first. Bishop recaptured. I was expecting pawn recapture, but once the bishop captures, then that kind of gives me a free move in b5 to expand on the queen side. Bishop drops back, and here I blundered. I thought e5 was good to go. That is the very typical pawn break in this structure, and neither of us, for the next two moves, saw white's very pretty tactical refutation, and that is knight b5. The idea is white's on the bishop, so if I take this knight, well, then this forks these two pieces, and this dark squared bishop actually is useful all of a sudden. So totally didn't see that. The engine points out that b4 is just awesome. It says that the best move for white is to go back to b1, and if knight retreating to b1 is the best move according to the engine, you know that you have done something very right. The engine likes the idea of piling up on this weak backward a2 pawn, eventually winning it and trying to convert that endgame a pawn up. Obviously that's a good plan. I played the thematic, but in this position wrong, e5. Opponent believed it though, played rook ad1. Here I still don't see the tactic, neither does my opponent, and I just develop my rook. I really wanted to prioritize getting all my pieces into play. Same tactic still works for white, neither of us saw it. Opponent captured, which is what I was expecting all along, and after knight takes, bishop takes, these my bishops are very active. My rooks control files. Engine says black's just significantly better in this position. Didn't do anything fancy, just developed the pieces. And with the exception of not seeing that tactic, have played pretty accurate chess so far. White captured and I recaptured, and white played rook d1. It should be said my opponent is 700 points lower rated than me. Would have been very happy with the draw. I felt very good about these active pieces. I felt very good about my queenside pawn mass that's already got a pawn on b5. A very simple plan in the endgame to run the king all the way in if everything gets traded. And I also kind of wanted to prove a point that seeking trades, especially when you're seeking trades specifically for the purpose of getting a draw, rarely achieves that objective. You have to continue to play aggressive principled chess no matter what, and activity still matters even in the endgame, and having simple plans still matters even in the endgame. Not having a lot of material on the board does not mean that the game is over. It just amplifies the relative value of the pieces, and so a more active king in the endgame is a huge advantage as compared to obviously a more active king in the middle game. The same applies for the other pieces. So let's just go to the next move. Engine says this is inaccurate. The engine still likes the idea of piling up on the a2 pawn. Engine wants to play rook a6 here, rook a8 here. And the idea is that my minor pieces actually control all of the squares on the d file. And so white's rook doesn't actually control the d file. There are no squares to infiltrate. Meanwhile, black can actually make some progress on the queen side with a timely b4, with these active bishops, with the rook on the file. So engine likes that plan, and now that I've seen it, obviously it makes a lot of sense. I trade, and the engine says this is equal, but with a knight on b2 dominated by the b5 pawn, with my bishop and knight already active and very capable of jumping into the center at any time, I still was very confident that I was going to win this game. In games, it is super important to activate the king. The king is no longer a mild defender in the endgame. It has to be an aggressive attacking piece. And so I immediately start my king running in to these dark squares on the queen side. And white takes a little bit more time to do it and struggles to find the right defense. I just relentlessly keep marching my king. And here white plays knight d3, which the engine says is fine, but this really allows me to execute the plan I wanted to, and visually just looks completely crushing. And now that the engine has had a little bit more time to think about it, it agrees. I just take that knight with the bishop, and after king recaptures, my king is getting in, and the opponent doesn't keep his head and find the right defense, lashes out with a4, which just instantly loses. It's funny, I thought this was completely winning. I thought we might get to something like this, and the activity of the kings I thought would decide the game. Defending passively like this can rarely work. You can rarely find enough computer moves that are so accurate to hold that position. And so in this position, if white would have ruled out that super passive defense, then white might have realized that the only option is to play aggressively and try to make use of white's pawn majority on the king side, assisted by the bishop, and try to get his own pawns rolling. Didn't see it. Again, it's just so hard for us non-titled players to weather the storm and play against the initiative. It's so much easier as a practical matter to be the one calling the shots, and here white doesn't find the right defense. I just take that pawn, and now these two connected passers are very, very fast. King c4, but just knight d7 keeps the king out. All these squares are protected, and now the pawns can start to run. Opponent played h3, which doesn't do anything. And here I had a chance to simplify to an even easier straight king and pawn endgame, and so I took it. Knight e5, king in, knight takes, pawn takes, and now the b pawn just runs. And my opponent can't stop that pawn. He took a couple of my pawns before resigning here, before I could play my next move. This queen easily stops all of these pawns. I was going to play this move, and after something like king a8, you can just go and eat up all the pawns. All you have to do is make sure you don't stalemate white, which is not hard to pull off here. So, decent game, played more principled chess, and really had no inaccuracies until I played the thematic but wrong in this position, e5. All in all, an okay game, 90% accuracy according to the engine, which after my sparkling 76% accuracy in round 3, I'll take it. So that's it for this video. Hope you got something out of it. Keep grinding those tactics, even when queens are off the board, and there's a thematic move to play that is very principled and strategically sound. Every single thing is secondary to tactics. Keep grinding them. Hope you enjoyed the video.